Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Parliament. My name is Nash Shah. I'm the Member of Parliament for Bramford West. Just for the record, Bramford West is the centre of the universe. City of Culture 2025. Long though we're all clear about that, we'll get along just fine. So thank you to Lawrence. You're all here for equal justice today. Thank you to Lawrence for having me host you. It's an honour to host you all this evening. I'm a former NHS commissioner, so I am very familiar with the NHS. I'm also an activist by background, and I cut my teeth in politics, if you like, on the other side. So I had a parent who went to prison after killing an abusive partner. I had a forced marriage at 15 as well. I left school at 12. So I'm not your typical average politician who walks into this place. But what I do know from my life experiences is that racism exists. So I tackled racism in the legal justice system when I started my activism, if you like, because a woman can kill a man after being beaten for 20 years and she'll get life off, and a man can beat a woman for 20 years and kill her and then get away with manslaughter. And then if added to that you happen to be brown, added to that you happen to be a Muslim, then the rest of it. It's not rocket science. That we all know the drill. It really, really is an honour to be sharing this platform with you. The NHS, we're talking about whistleblowing, we're talking about what it means. So I'm also a former whistleblower. In 2010, it was one of the top 10 cases in the country, and it was based on, it was whistleblowing. But what I can say, and what I do know from my experience, from my lived experience, from my work experience, is when it comes to people from black and minority ethnic communities, when it comes to us in systems, we're part of systems, and we do not have equal access to those systems. It's ironic that we're in a building where the doors are made for equal justice, and yet we don't have that equality in a country such as ours. All of us are committed. What I will say to you, you have the people in us who are committed to making sure we keep these conversations alive and that we do achieve a cultural shift in institutions. But let's make no mistake, the road is harder now. So we have to carry on the conversation. We have to fight it with the passion because it affects us, and we have a responsibility to society. And that societal responsibility, if we change it, we are a better Britain than what we find ourselves in. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Good evening, everybody. So thank you very much for this invitation to speak. Normally I would stand up, but because I've written it down this time, so I thought I need to speak to everybody and keep it really precise, concise, so not take over. Some of you will know me, some of you won't, but I'm actually a professor of urogynecology, which is a specialist for surgery in women. The first such professor to be appointed at University College London. The only black professor in a surgical specialty, to our knowledge, not just in University College London, but in as a female in most of the UK. So we're not aware if there are any other surgeons like myself. I'm also black, as you can see, and I'm Muslim. So I'm what we would call a rare and probably a significant presence in UK medicine. It was very clear that throughout my journey there was an attempt to silence me, and despite having a global reputation in women's health, I've done a huge amount of work in the areas of female genital mutilation, obstetric fistula, traumatic birth injury, maternity failures, incontinence, prolapse. And I'm not sure if any of you have heard about the story of MESH. But then we come back to, well, I'm the whistleblower for MESH, and I'm actually the only doctor, not just in the UK, but in the world, who has actually stood up with the women with complications after MESH. And it's based on the work I did that MESH came to a halt in the UK and different parts of the world. Given all of this work, you would think that I would have been applauded, but I was not. And indeed, I was dismissed by University College Hospital in November last year. So the double standards of the dismissal. So why was I dismissed? Well, I was dismissed because there was a case brought against me in the General Medical Council. The General Medical Council decided to suspend me and suspend me over a period of 9 months. But interestingly, I was dismissed as well based on that. And actually the Medical Act of 1983 clearly and explicitly states that a suspension does not result in a termination of the contract. However, in the same trust, we had a colleague in 2020, a white male, who had actually undertaken a never event. He removed a vagina in a transgender patient who explicitly requested not to have the vagina removed. He was suspended for 5 months and reinstated back at University College Hospital afterwards and carried on with his career. He did leave University College Hospital not long after that, mainly because he wanted to develop another field of surgery. So the discrimination is at every level. It's pervasive the whole time in their reading work. So coming back to the mesh scandal, you would think, well, why are we interested in mesh? Well, mesh is a plastic product. It was used, really came into existence about 25 years ago and was used widely over the last 20 odd years. However, it is quite defective, it's painful, and often it's a life-altering implant. It is used to treat problems women suffer, particularly after childbirth, incontinence, prolapse, and so on. Many of these women actually suffered chronic pain, nerve injury, became debilitated, lost their homes, lost their jobs, lost their families, and so on. And in some cases, the exposure of mesh in the vagina, and I'm going to use all these medical terms, resulted in partners being harmed during intercourse. So the slicing effect, and it was that, was reported to us. However, who was putting in these implants? They're predominantly male surgeons. They implanted them without comprehension or knowledge about what happens to women and did not really comprehend the long-term effects. And I think it's important to understand that plastic is not a material that's not going to change its character. We all know, and I can see the women nodding their heads, if you put a plastic bag in the sun, it will crumble after a while. So you can imagine there's a degrading process, there's an alteration in composition, and so on. So it was affecting all parts of the body. However, when the women were complaining, they were often gaslighted, and all their problems were deemed to be psychosomatic. It was quite clear to me that the medical and the legal arena needed me out of the way for 2 reasons. One, mesh implanters were no longer making money out of implanting mesh. We had brought that to a halt, and it's unlikely to change. However, they were making money out of medical legal practice by convincing patients to change sides. And this is something that became increasingly evident because they did talk about taking El Neil down. I didn't realise, though, there's that huge thing that it required all of them to take me down. UCLH were aware of this activity, and they showed me actually the email, but they did nothing to reprimand, discipline, or sanction any of the doctors, both in-house and outside. The second reason they wanted me out of the way was to try and restore and normalise mesh implantation. They want to bring it back, basically. That's where the big drive is, that's where the big money is, and I'm fully aware of 2 meetings that have happened where the mesh implanting fraternity have met with insurers, private insurers, to try and convince them to bring mesh back. The insurers have said unless the government okays it, we can't do that. So there is a big drive on that front. And the last thing, which has been a major issue, is that the women who have been harmed have been seeking redress, some form of redress, acceptance and recognition. And by taking me out of the picture, it means, and particularly if you call me dishonest, you move me out of the picture, then they can say, well, you know, she was dishonest, she lied to you about the mesh being a problem. Actually, the mesh isn't a problem, and you don't need redress, and you need to just carry on living with the mesh as it is. But despite all of this patriarchal culture, which has been extremely hard to work under, and I have worked under it for almost 30 years, 10 years of training, 20 years as a consultant, I will still continue to advocate for women around the world, ensuring access to patient-centered, patient-driven, supportive, appropriate and safe healthcare. I think that is critical, no more so than now. And in my opinion, it's not just a fight for a specific group of women, but for every woman, every person of colour, because we know the inequalities are present, and every whistleblower has been silenced. And I will definitely not be silenced. The people who know me know I'm not silenced. And I do hope everybody will stand with me on this fight for justice. And in the end, I think I have to really robustly reiterate, it's not just a fight for women's health. It is a fight for women's rights, and it's a fight for human rights. Okay, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this evening and to talk about this really important topic, race and the NHS. So I'm Professor Miranda Vaughan and I'm a non-executive director at Guy's and St Thomas NHS Foundation Trust. I'm also a non-executive director at the Evelina Women and Children's Hospital as well. I've been involved in healthcare for over 10 years, working as an ambassador, a trustee for a range of healthcare charities, which includes Kidney Research UK, Cancer Research UK, Breast Cancer Now. I've also been an Equalities Commissioner for Lambeth, and my focus there was on the Black and Asian community, looking at healthcare, employment, housing, and so on. And I'm the first Professor of Business and Law at the University of Roehampton. Prior to that, I was a Senior Visiting Fellow at Oxford University, working on the Braun Review, which comes out finally this October. We're launching at the House of Lords. And this is on boardroom sustainability, inclusion and corporate governance. I do lots of various things, including driving ED&I and working with global organisations, CEOs, in terms of how to make their organisations more diverse. And that's what I've been doing at Guy's and St Thomas NHS Foundation Trust. But it's really interesting listening to your story because I'm very hands-on at the hospital, and it's lots of, we've got the Royal Brompton, and we've got Guy's Hospital as well. So I'm on the ground listening to our staff, listening to patients as well. And I think in the first few months, and I've been on the board for over 2 years now, but in the first few months, I had my own medical appointment. I broke my thumb, so I was coming back. So I wasn't in work mode, but I was still observing. And I noticed that one of our security guards was being racially abused by a white, I don't know if he was a patient or just a member of the public. And I could have walked past and thought, well, it's not me, you know, I'll mind my business. But I actually spoke up and I reprimanded the white male, and I said to him, we will not tolerate racism in this organisation. We are an anti-racist organisation, so if you don't stop, you will have to be removed. I didn't know if that was the process, but I thought, this is not it. And so the white guy was drunk, he looked drugged up, he sort of just staggered off. And then I spoke to the security guard and I said to him, that was atrocious, you know, you should report that, like, what's your name? And he laughed and he said, this happens like 20, 30 times a day, every single day. Like, nothing happened. So why would I report it? Well, I brought that story into the boardroom within the first few months, and I said, we've got to do something. No one, whether it's patients, staff, no one should be tolerating being racially or abused in any form, especially as part of their job. So it's interesting when you say that when you raised your grievances, there was a lack of action. And a lack of action in the face of need is racism. And this is something that we've got to address. But it also comes down to a range of different issues. It's not just healthcare, it's within society, it's within housing. When I'm on the ground talking to the community, whether it's Lambeth, you know, going to visit various health centres, and I'm talking to patients, I'm talking to staff, lots of the health issues that people of colour are actually facing might be down to their housing. It could be down to the fact that, you know, when they're at school, they weren't supported, they don't have a good job, and they're in an unsafe working environment. So there are so many factors that we also need to consider. So when we're talking about race in the NHS, yes, we need to address what's happening within the NHS and within the healthcare, but then we've also got to look at what's happening around society and how can we speak up? How can we make those changes? Because there are policies, this is structural racism. And so what I want to do is address what can we do? What are the solutions? Because I've braced it on 5 C's. The first is the commitment. In order for us to address racism, we've got to accept and acknowledge that racism is a problem and it actually exists. We can't water it down. I know everyone in this space probably does agree with that. So I'm talking about your white colleagues. But I think we've also got to look at our spaces. How is racism operating within your organisation, within the NHS? And we've really got to make that analysis in order for us to figure out what changes need to be made. Because there are lots of NHS Foundation trusts who are all working separately. And I think the next C is collaboration. We've got to come together
And collaboration is not just within various NHS Foundation trusts or within the healthcare, but there's lots of lessons that we can learn from other sectors. And my background is not healthcare. I've mentioned I've been in the healthcare industry with charities for over 10 years. But prior to that, I was a banker, I was a hedge fund sales trader, I was a banking lawyer. But one of the key things that the healthcare sector wants to do is they want to bring in leaders from other sectors and things that's working in other sectors so that we can apply it within the healthcare. And I think that's going to be key. There's also communication. It's really important to make sure that there's a two-way communication. So there's reporting models. So when someone is facing racism, it's really important to make sure that there are the appropriate reporting and action does get made. But in order for the communication, it's got to be a two-way. The next is the consistency, and I think it's really important from a consistency perspective, and action is key. So many times when I would give an unconscious bias training or diversity training, I would stress that you can't just do a one-off and expect the racist person in your organisation to just all of a sudden see the light. It's not going to happen. And then we get Trump saying, oh, it doesn't work, let's scrap it. And then we've got all these global organisations saying, yes, we can't follow D&I, we're getting rid of it. I'm really proud of the fact that I work for an NHS Foundation Trust that in spite of these large global organisations backing away from that, they're actually pushing even more into that, and I think that's really important. But the community, it's so important to engage with the community and listen to what the community thinks we should be doing in order to have an anti-racism healthcare system in the UK. It's really important that we all come together because collectively our voices and the power of our pen is going to be really key. So I don't want anyone here to walk away feeling, or anyone that you know, or anyone that you work with feeling that they don't have power, because there is power in the voice and there is power in actually speaking up. And speaking up could be something as simple as having someone pronounce your name correctly, whether it's an African name, an Asian name, and not accepting that nickname. But I think in order for change to happen, the onus can't always be on the diverse person. And that's where the partnership, that's where the collaboration also comes into play, where we have the key voices in leadership who actually acknowledge that, and they're working very hard to make those changes and not to lose that priority. For me, every board meeting I'm in, I was in a board meeting this morning for 3 hours, and every single meeting I'm in, I make sure that anti-racism, ED&I, it's always on the agenda. We're always talking about it, and we've got a chair that always makes sure that it's on the agenda as well. And I forgot to mention, I also am a host of the Dead podcast. This isn't a plug, but the chair of our Guys and St Thomas NHS Foundation Trust, Charles Alexander, he talks about what we can be doing from a health inequalities perspective and what we need to be doing within the healthcare system. He came from chairing the Royal Marsden. We all know about cancer rates and how Black women also and Asian women are more likely to die from breast cancer. So I think that would be a really interesting episode to watch, which is out next week, to hear from someone who is chairing the UK's largest NHS Foundation Trust in terms of what we can be doing to address this. There's a lot more that I can be saying, but I'm going to stop there, and hopefully we'll come back for the Q&A. Thank you.
Don't you just love being in spaces like this? I feel like I'm in therapy. I wasn't going to speak to my personal experience, but I'm quite inspired by your story. And hi, I'm Preeti, I'm a fellow whistleblower. So I'm Preeti Kathrecha. I am Head of Development and Engagement at NHS Providers, and we'll move on to that. In a different lifetime, my background was equality and human rights, and I was at one point one of the most senior people working on race at the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I challenged their position when they decided to do a U-turn and deny that structural racism was a thing, and I won't go into the detail of that, but it didn't end well. I then moved on to my current position now, so I am going to speak to my current role and talk about NHS providers. So we are a membership body, and we have 100% membership of NHS trusts. We represent the snowy white peaks that you spoke about, trust leaders, chairs, CEOs, boards, and we work at that level. We provide leadership and development training, and we provide influencing support, and we provide safe spaces for them. And so I'm going to just share with you some insight based on our conversations with members that speak to some of the issues that my colleagues have been talking about. Forgive me, I'm slightly obsessed with Westerns at the moment, so my framing is the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, I mean, we could spend all evening talking about all the good work that goes on at trust levels. The majority of our members say that they are midway in their journey towards fully embedding race equality as a core part of board business. However, the bad. Only 4% of our members said race equality was fully embedded as a core part of board business. 4%. And this is after we sit on a very strong evidence base for a long time. We know the issues. And I'm not, I'm going to be repeating what you already know. We're not embedding, our members said, they're not embedding race equality into board assurance frameworks. They are making poor progress on actions, including taking a personal accountability, doing the self-learning, being a white ally, being an active bystander, and then moving on to the ugly. So I'm going to be really honest with you. I'm quite sick, and I think you are. I'm quite sick of saying the same thing. I'm quite sick of presenting the same thing. We know these patterns are entrenched, they're persistent, and I'm sick of being in spaces that continue to admire the problem. I'm suggesting we are chipping away, if you like, and I'm sick of being in spaces that make it someone else's responsibility. Most important insights I want to share with you is our members are telling us that they're not quite there yet when moving from tackling racism and discrimination to being truly anti-racist. So addressing structural challenges, systemic, institutional racism, and in some cases, even accepting that that's the case. So we're talking about pay gap disparities, underrepresentation at senior levels, disciplinary structures, understanding health inequalities and how they overlap with race equality, and recruitment and retention practices. So at NHS providers, we've made it our mantra and embedded this across all of our programs and all of our work, that 3 things need to happen to make change happen. First of those is hearts and minds change. So you can't make anyone do something unless really their heart's in it, and that's especially true of race equality. Secondly is to increase people's confidence and capability to act. And by that I'm talking about sharing good practice case studies. What actually works? What has high impact? How do we learn from our peers? And we're encouraging safe space, psychological safe spaces and peer learning spaces for senior leaders and those below board to show that there are spaces like this to share. And then thirdly, it's about taking accountability. I know you've all spoken to that. And we're talking about embedding key assurance goals on race as a core and everyday part of business. One thing I want to end on, and I won't be too long, is at a national level, our members are calling for a real strengthening and accountability to actively call out discrimination. And by that I mean more support from the CQC and from NHS England. My final point is on this, is that our members are really concerned about NHS England's commitment to EDI. Their fears have been exacerbated, and it's playing out at the moment internationally, as you know. But a while ago, Steve Barclay questioned the need for EDI roles. And Wes Streeting's recent comments on linking misguided approaches and anti-whiteness to EDI in the NHS, which is encouraging a populist, almost right-wing backlash and diverting from the good work that's happening. Our members tell us that there's been a steady exodus of good EDI people from the NHS. The EDI teams, including the wonderful RES team, are being culled, budgets are being cut, their content is being censored. Funded work focusing solely on race equality is being diluted so that it's more palatable. Let's call it workforce inequalities. Let's not call it race equality. So, my final thought is, how are we going to make any impact on race equality in the NHS if we're not even allowed to say those words?
So, thank you for the invitation here. So, we suggested that I might talk a little bit about what racism looks like in the NHS, why does it happen and what can we do about it? So just, I mean, as we all know, racism takes many forms and impacts health in different and interconnected ways. Sorry, can't hear it. Too quiet. So we can frame its manifestation as structural, as institutional, as interpersonal, and the structural racism impacts the social determinants of health. So we know that the conditions in which people are born, in which they live, work, age, have an impact on their health. For example, poverty. So we know that poverty has a real serious impact on health, but we also know that our social norms, culture, and laws and so on mean that people from ethnic minority backgrounds are more likely, or people from some ethnic backgrounds are more likely than others to be living in poverty. Institutional racism refers to the racism that's inherent in the way that the NHS operates. Susie's given us a really striking example of that. There are other examples, there are plenty of other examples. Inbuilt inequities in care provision and resource. So, for example, many of us will know that sickle cell is the most common genetic disease in the UK. It predominantly affects people of African or Caribbean heritage. The No One's Listening report from 2021 highlighted inequalities in care and experience and variability in treatment of people who are living with sickle. Comparative research that was commissioned by our organisation, the NHS Race and Health Observatory, has found that although sickle cell and cystic fibrosis have got a similar prevalence and a similar median age of death in the general population, there are 2 specialist nurses per 100 patients for cystic fibrosis. There are 0.5 specialist nurses per 100 patients for sickle cell. And then, of course, experiences of overt and also covert interpersonal racism affect people's health, but they also, as we've heard, weaken the health workforce. So why does it happen? It's a really big question, but I think we can kind of boil it down in some ways to racism in the NHS has its roots in colonialism. Much of Western medicine was established during colonial times, and it's shaped by the colonial era power hierarchies. So, for example, the typical body, the archetypal patient are based on white, often male Europeans. And racism persists in the NHS because of a failure to confront it head on. We've recently published 7 anti-racism principles, and very similar to what Miranda outlined with her 5 Cs. I'm just going to highlight 3 of these. So the first one of them, and this is really critical, it's name racism. So many of you will know the fantastic Professor Kamara Jones. She defines naming racism as 3 actions. The first one is acknowledging that racism exists. The second one is working to understand how it operates. And the third one is committing to addressing it. The second one is around adopting meaningful community participation. And this is really about building trust, again, as Miranda highlighted. People know what people know, so that community input is really important. And the third one, and this is critical for the accountability, is about data. So collect and analyse data stratified by ethnicity and use those data not only to inform improvement, but also to monitor change. Our call to action from the observatory is really the 7 anti-racism principles are available on our website. Please share them widely with your networks. Thank you.
Okay, so the NHS is a microcosm, isn't it, of our society? How many people do the NHS employ? Any idea? 1.4 million. It's the biggest single employer in Europe. It's the biggest single employer in this country. It's also institutionally racist. Sorry to say, it's got all the symptoms that you see in the Metropolitan Police. Disproportionate number of misconducts against black staff. Grievances not upheld. Closing of ranks. Very hierarchical. Yeah? Know your place, as somebody was saying earlier this evening. So there's two games here. There's the race game and the money game. On the money game side, the government decided you couldn't settle whistleblowing cases in the NHS, okay? Ostensibly because they wanted all the dirt to come out. If kids are dying in hospitals, everyone needs to know about it. They shouldn't be silenced. So you get that. But what it means is that they could have done it another way. Cases could have settled, and they could have just said no NDAs. They could have done it that way, yeah? What it means is that certain law firms are billing £500,000 a year, and that money comes out of frontline services. So with the lack of capital investment, all the bad stories in the right-wing press, they're trying to destroy the trust in the NHS. So a black nurse, a white patient said to a black nurse, "Don't touch me, I don't want you to touch my skin." Yeah? So she complained about that. And then the trust didn't back her up. So she put in a complaint. What happened next? Yeah, she had complaints against her. How many? 64. She had 64 complaints against her in 2 weeks. I've never heard of that. Even in the Met Police, they'll be pushing that, yeah? 64 complaints. And it takes days to work through it, months to work through it. And at the end of it, there was just nothing there. It was just all hearsay. Yeah, she was just a very, very effective nurse who took exception to the racist comment. Yeah? So this is a big problem. But it's a societal problem. It's not just in the NHS. The NHS just happens to be the biggest workplace. Yeah. So we know racism's getting worse. So what do you do on the ground? Well, your only right is to bring a grievance, isn't it? Yeah? And if you bring a grievance for racism, what's going to happen to you? You're going to get retaliated against. 99% of people who bring grievances get retaliated against. And are they going to uphold your grievance? No. So 99% of grievances are rejected. Why are they rejected? Because if the trust admits to you being subject to racism, they can't defend the case in the tribunal. They would have to sack the white person who did the racism. And HR is almost set up these days to shut stuff down, deny stuff, back the manager, back the white member of staff. But at the moment, under the Equality Act, you have a right to sue for racism, don't you? Okay, so that feels good, but it's just completely cosmetic. It's absolutely cosmetic. The cost of taking the case outweighs the benefit you're going to get from it. More than 50% of people who sued for racism last year got less than £10,000. Okay, the median award was just under £10,000. Okay, you don't get your costs back. So often, if it's a pre-dismissal case, you're £20,000 worse off if you pay privately, if you win. And only 5% of people are winning. They're moving away from all panels to a single judge. Most of the judges are white, late middle-aged people who don't relate. Yeah, they try, but they just don't see it. If I shout and scream at you in the workplace and cause you to have a nervous breakdown, how long do you have to sue me? No. 3 years. 3 years. You sue for personal injury, 3 years in the county court. Yeah? But if I shout and scream at you and call you racist names and you have a nervous breakdown, you only have 3 months less a day. Yeah. It's the same claim. Just one has race in it, one doesn't. So it was put in to prevent those claims from being taken. So the system doesn't work. It's designed not to work. It's designed to give you the illusion of having the right not to be discriminated against. So in practice, if you do end up in a situation where you're going for a tribunal, yes, you can win, but the award, all the people who've won large race cases or large whistleblowing cases will tell you to a person, I would never do it again. Yeah? Because the benefit of it, even the justice of it, and statistically, it's more likely the person you've complained about will be promoted than dismissed. Yeah. Okay? So you're not even changing the immediate. So how do you change that? So there are various ways of changing it. One is punitive damages. Okay? In America, 2 examples. I represented a black guy who was at work. He got pinned against the wall by a white guy and called the N-word at work. How much did he get? £2,500. Yeah. And I spent a whole day convincing the judge to raise it from 1,000. Okay. In America, punitive damages probably about 5-10 million, isn't it? There's a Court of Appeal judge who said that an award for punitive damages for more than £20,000 would undermine the British legal system, would bring us into disrepute. Yeah, and yeah, America, not a socialist republic, by the way, doesn't have any problem with awarding larger sums on whistleblowing. So we have to have punitive damages. We need better places at which people could be held accountable. So the GMC just doesn't work. If someone senior in trust rings up the GMC and say, kill that person, the GMC are going to kill that person. Yeah, but no questions asked. And if they're introducing dishonesty allegations when no one actually felt that black person was being dishonest, that's a really scary thing for the future. We have to join together and fight back. Yeah. And it's about abolishing the Equality Act, introducing an Inequality Act that recognises structural racism. And so when a black person says, I'm a victim of racism, the reaction is not, oh, you're playing a race card, you're not very good at your job, you must be using it as an excuse. It's, yeah, you probably are, because 25% of people are. You seem to will buy into that. Yeah? Punitive damages, get rid of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Just a little side joke there. They've been weaponized. Liz Truss said in December 2020, I'm appointing a new chair and 4 commissioners to the Equality and Human Rights Commission so they can carry out the government's agenda. She said it openly to Euroconservatives. It was illegal. It should have been judicially reviewed. So now we have an Equality and Human Rights Commission that have banned findings of institutional racism. Yeah? And this government's inherited all of that. So lots to do. Let's join together, and thank you very much.